Nostradamus, you've heard the name, right? For almost 500 years, it's been linked to these just chillingly accurate prophecies. But here's the big question. Was he a genuine seer? Someone who could actually see the future? Or was he something else? Maybe a master poet whose real genius wasn't in prediction, but in words. All right, let's get into it and try to figure this out.
I mean, it's the question that's kept people arguing for centuries, right? Believers on one side, skeptics on the other. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at his most famous predictions. I mean, the ones that are really hard to explain away. Then we'll look at his biggest failures. And finally, we'll talk about this one key idea that might just explain the whole thing.
But first things first, to even begin to understand his prophecies, you've got to understand the man himself. And just as important, the wild, chaotic world he came from.
Yeah, Michel de Nostredame, he wasn't some mystical wizard living in a spooky tower. Not at all. He was a doctor, and he was living through absolute chaos. We're talking constant war, political turmoil, and the plague. And the plague, it wasn't just some abstract threat for him. It tragically took his own wife and children. Can you imagine? It's that kind of intense suffering and uncertainty that really pushed him to look for answers in astrology and prophecy. And you know what? He got really good at it. So good, in fact, that he caught the attention of some very powerful people, including the Queen of France herself, Catherine de Medici.
Now, this part is absolutely crucial. You have to understand how Nostradamus saw himself. He never once claimed to be having these magical, divine visions from God. Nope. He called his method judicial astrology. Think of it less like magic and more like, well, an academic science of his time. It was all about interpreting patterns in the stars to predict big, large-scale future events. So in his mind, he was a scholar, a researcher, not some kind of magician.
Okay, so with all that in mind, the man, his world, his methods, let's look at the predictions that actually made him a legend, because this is where things start to get a little bit spooky.
Just listen to these words. So cryptic, right? Poetic, and definitely ominous. By itself, you might just think, okay, it's a weird poem. But when you put it side by side with a real historical event, well, that's when you get that little shiver down your spine.
So get this, only a few years after Nostradamus published that, the King of France, Henry II, is in a jousting tournament, for fun. His opponent's lance shatters on impact. A piece of it, a splinter, flies right through the visor of the king's gilded helmet, pierces his eye, and goes into his brain. He didn't die right away. He suffered in absolute agony for 10 days before he finally passed. A truly cruel death.
Okay, let's put the pieces together. The prophecy said the young lion will overcome the older one. The king's opponent was younger. It says he'll pierce his eyes through a golden cage. The splinter went through the visor of his gilded helmet. 2 wounds made one, the splinter in his eye going into his brain. I mean, come on. The details seem to line up with just terrifying precision.
All right, let's fast forward now. Wait for it. Over 200 years. Take a look at this verse. It talks about an uprising from the enslaved populace, about princes and lords being locked up in prisons. And I want you to pay really close attention to this one phrase, headless idiots.
I mean, wow. This reads almost like a textbook summary of the French Revolution, doesn't it? You have the common people, the enslaved populace, rising up. You have the royalty captured and imprisoned. And those headless figures? How can you not immediately think of the guillotine? Of the thousands, including the king and queen, who literally lost their heads.
And then there's this really fascinating anagram hidden in his writings. Nostradamus mentions a name, or a phrase, P-A-U, ne Laurent. Looks like total gibberish at first, right? But if you just shuffle those letters around a bit, you get Napoleon Roy. That is shockingly close to Napoleon the King in French.
And it gets better. He also wrote about an emperor who would be born near Italy and whose reign would be incredibly costly for the empire. Well, where was Napoleon born? On the island of Corsica, which is right next to Italy. And his wars, they cost Europe millions upon millions of lives and fortunes. You see what I mean? The hits just keep on coming.
And believe it or not, it doesn't even stop in the 19th century. His writings seem to touch on the 20th century too. There are these weird references to battles in the sky long before airplanes were even a dream. He talks about a figure named Hister, which sounds an awful lot like Hitler. And then there's this chilling bit about 2 cities being destroyed by a terror the world had never seen before. It's so hard not to connect that to the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I mean, at this point, you just have to wonder, how? How is any of this possible?
But okay, just when you're about ready to be a full-on believer, we have to talk about the huge, massive prediction that just completely, totally, flat out failed.
1999.
For people who followed Nostradamus, this date was everything. This was supposed to be the big one.
So here's the thing. This was one of his most specific, most clear, dated prophecies. And it was a total bust. He wrote that in July 1999, a great king of terror was going to come down from the sky. The whole world was watching, holding its breath, and nothing. Absolutely nothing happened. And this one big failure, it's kind of the key that unlocks the entire other side of this whole debate.
So that's the big puzzle, right? If he could be so wrong about something so specific, then how could he have been so right about all those other things? And that brings us right to the heart of the matter. Was it genuine vision, or was it just masterful vagueness?
And this leads us to what might be the single most important idea for understanding Nostradamus. It's a concept called retrofitting. Here's how it works. The theory is that his prophecies are written in such a poetic, ambiguous way that you can basically make them fit any major event, but only after it's already happened. So you take something you already know, like the French Revolution, and you look back at his vague words and say, oh, see, it fits perfectly.
So you end up with two totally different ways of looking at this guy. On one hand, you have the believer's view. He was a prophet with some kind of divine vision. On the other, you have the skeptic's view. He was just a genius with words, a master of ambiguous poetry. Was he seeing the future, or was he just writing stuff so universal it could apply to almost any big conflict in human history?
So, what's the verdict? Prophet or poet? Let's try and wrap this all up.
Well, one compelling idea is that Nostradamus' real magic wasn't about seeing the future at all. It was in his incredible skill with language. Think of his book like a giant Rorschach test, but for history. You know those inkblots? He wrote about huge themes, war, death, power, revolution, in such a poetic and metaphorical way that pretty much any generation, at any point in time, can look into his words and see their own history, their own fears, reflected right back at them.
But, for all the doom and gloom we've talked about, it's really important to remember that he didn't just predict darkness. Buried among all those hundreds of cryptic warnings, there's this one little line, a line of pure, simple hope. It says that no matter how bad things might seem, the man of light will rise.
And I guess that leaves us with one last big question to think about. Are the prophecies of Nostradamus a map of the future? Something that lays out a path we're all forced to follow? Or is it really more of a mirror? Something that just reflects back the same timeless patterns of human nature we see over and over again? Our conflicts, our tragedies, but also our incredible capacity for hope. What do you think? The answer, it seems, is still up to us to figure out.
I want you to try a bit of a thought experiment with me. It's a little uncomfortable, maybe a little terrifying. But stay with me for a second.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So imagine you are walking into a room, a dimly lit, quiet room, and right in the center of that room is a heavy velvet curtain.
Setting a very dramatic scene here.
Right. But behind that curtain is the entirety of the future, not just, tomorrow's stock prices or next week's weather report. We're talking 500 years of history.
Wow.
Yeah. The wars, the inventions, the rise and fall of nations, the exact moment of your own death, the fate of your great-grandchildren.
It's the ultimate Pandora's box, isn't it? The sum total of human destiny just sitting right there a few feet away.
Exactly. And you have the ability to pull that curtain back. You can see it all. But here's the question I really want you to ask yourself. Do you look?
That is a tough one.
And if you do look and you see something absolutely terrible coming, can you stop it? Or are you just cursed to watch it happen, completely helpless like a passenger in a car with no brakes?
That's the classic philosophical dilemma of prescience right there. The burden of knowledge. Because if the future is fixed enough to be seen, then logically it's fixed enough to be inevitable.
Right.
Like if you see a crash and you swerve to avoid it, did you change the future or was your swerving part of the vision all along?
It honestly makes your head spin just thinking about it. And that brings us to the second, maybe more practical question.
Which is?
If some guy down the street, or, in this case, a guy from the 1500s wearing a heavy robe and smelling like old parchment, claimed he had already looked behind that curtain, would you believe him?
Or would you think he's just a charlatan selling snake oil?
Exactly. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are walking that really fine razor's edge between history and the supernatural. We are tackling the man, the myth, the absolute titan of prediction, Michel de Nostredame.
Better known to the world, and certainly to Hollywood, as Nostradamus.
The one and only. Now, before everyone rolls their eyes thinking about, tabloid covers in the supermarket checkout line or some 2 a.m. conspiracy theory documentary. I want to set the ground rules for today.
Very necessary.
Yeah, we aren't looking at internet memes today. We are basing our entire discussion on a really fascinating, rigorous piece of work titled Nostradamus, Deciphering the Architect of Prophecy.
And what I really appreciate about this source material is that it doesn't just throw a list of spooky coincidences at us and shout, magic.
Right, it doesn't do that at all.
No, it actually tries to dissect the man himself. It looks at his specific methods, his background, and the actual texts, the quatrains, that have made people lose sleep for generations.
It treats him as a historical figure first.
Exactly. A historical figure first and a mystic second.
So our mission today is to be intellectual detectives. We're going to sift through these famous 4-line poems provided in the source. We're going to try to separate the, hey, that's kind of a vague coincidence from the, okay, that is genuinely terrifying and I need to sit down for a minute.
We need to explore whether these are genuine forecasts of future events or if this is just poetic vagueness that we, sitting here in the present, are projecting our own history onto.
Is he a prophet, or are we just really, really good at finding patterns where there aren't any?
That is the ultimate question.
I have to admit, reading through the source material, I usually consider myself a major skeptic. I dismiss this stuff as horoscopes for history buffs. But there are a few details in here that absolutely stop me cold.
There are certainly moments in the text that defy easy explanation. Even when you apply the most rigorous skepticism, some of the specificities are, they're unsettling.
Unsettling is a great word for it. But before we get to the exploding cities and the dying kings, we have to set the stage. Who was this guy? Because the popular image is this wizard in a tall, pointy hat, stroking a beard, looking into a crystal ball in a dark tower while lightning strikes outside.
That's the caricature. That's the Halloween costume version of the man. But the reality described in the source is much more grounded, and frankly, it's much darker. To really understand Nostradamus, you can't look at him in a vacuum. You have to understand the 16th century. You have to understand the literal air he was breathing.
And the source paints a pretty grim picture of that era. It wasn't exactly a vacation spot.
Not at all. The source describes it as a time defined by war and plague. This wasn't the golden, romanticized renaissance of art and philosophy that we sometimes picture in museums.
Yeah, no beautiful marble statues here.
No, this is a time where death was literally walking the streets. The bubonic plague, the Black Death. It wasn't a one-time event. It came in waves. It completely decimated populations.
Just wave after wave of sickness.
And on top of that, it was a time of brutal religious civil wars where your neighbor might kill you just for praying the wrong way.
And this is the part that really surprised me about his biography when I was reading the source. Nostradamus wasn't born a prophet. He didn't start out trying to predict the future. He was a doctor.
Yes, he was a physician.
He was trying to save people in the present.
And this is so crucial to understanding his psychology. He was a man of science, at least for his time. He was out there actively treating plague victims.
Putting himself at risk.
Exactly. He was mixing herbal remedies, advising on basic hygiene. He was on the front lines of this nightmare. But the source details a tragedy that completely broke him.
He lost his family.
He did. And we really need to sit with that for a moment. Imagine the terrible irony and the absolute horror of that.
I can't even imagine.
You are a learned physician. You are traveling the countryside, treating strangers, likely saving some of them or at least easing their passing. But then the plague comes to your own home.
Yeah.
And despite all your knowledge, all your medicines, you watch your wife and your 2 children die.
That is just absolutely heartbreaking. It changes the whole vibe of his story for me because he's not doing this for power or fame. He's a man who has been completely hollowed out by grief.
It explains the massive shift in his life. The source suggests that this specific trauma is what pivoted his focus. He turned away from medicine, which he felt had failed him, and fully toward astrology and prophecy.
It makes sense psychologically.
It's almost as if, having lost total control over his present, he desperately tried to gain some control over the future. If he couldn't stop the tragedy, maybe he could at least see the next one coming. It's a trauma response on a grand scale.
That makes him feel so much more human to me. It's not about magic, it's about coping. But let's clarify that magic part, because the source is clear. Did he claim to be a psychic? Did he walk around saying, God is talking to me?
No, and the source is very specific about making this distinction. Nostradamus never claimed to be a medium.
Oh.
He didn't have visions in the Joan of Arc sense. He didn't fall into trances and wake up with a poem. He described his work as judicial astrology.
Judicial astrology, that sounds like a legal term. Or something administrative from the DMV. What does that actually mean in the context of the 1500s?
It means he viewed himself as an interpreter, not a conduit. He was interpreting celestial patterns.
Like a map.
Think of it like a meteorologist reading a weather map today. A meteorologist looks at high-pressure systems, wind velocity, and humidity, and predicts a storm. They aren't magically summoning the storm.
Right, they're just reading the data.
Exactly. Nostradamus looked at planetary alignments, conjunctions, and eclipses. He genuinely believed the stars were a giant clockwork mechanism that dictated events on Earth.
So he's essentially a data analyst, but his data set is the night sky.
Precisely. He was calculating, not hallucinating. He would spend nights in his observatory meticulously calculating the positions of the planets for years in the future, and then trying to correlate those positions with historical events to predict what would happen next.
That sounds exhausting.
It was. And this gave him a huge veneer of scientific legitimacy. He wasn't some fringe hermit shouting on a street corner about the end of days. He was a scholar.
Yeah.
And that gave him access to the highest levels of power.
Which brings us to Catherine de Medici. The source mentions her heavily. And for anyone who skipped European history class, she wasn't just some minor noble, she was the Queen of France.
She was arguably the most powerful woman in Europe at the time. She was the absolute power behind the throne for decades, serving as regent for her sons. And she was his patron.
She protected him.
She absolutely protected him, primarily from the Inquisition.
But why? Why would the Queen of France protect a guy writing spooky poems? You'd think the church would want him burned at the stake for heresy.
Because the elite are always the most paranoid about the future. They have the most to lose. Catherine was highly superstitious, yes, but she was also incredibly strategic.
That makes sense. Keep your friends close.
Right. If this man could truly see threats to her dynasty, she wanted him on her payroll, not her enemies. It tells us that Nostradamus was validated by the absolute power structure of the 16th century. He had a seat at the table, he was invited to court, he literally cast horoscopes for the royal children.
So he's credible to the people of his time, he's got the royal stamp of approval. But let's be honest, people in the 1500s believed in a lot of things we know aren't true today. They believed tomatoes were poisonous and that you could turn lead into gold.
Fair point.
Let's test his credibility now. Let's get to the actual predictions, because there's one specific story in the source that is, well, it's the big aha moment. It's the one that makes even the skeptics sweat a little bit.
You're referring to the death of King Henry II.
The Golden Cage prophecy.
This is the big one. It is arguably the most famous and specific hit in the entire Nostradamus catalog. If you're building a case for him, this is your Exhibit A.
It's the one everyone talks about.
It's the prediction that made him a superstar in his own lifetime.
Okay, walk us through it. What did the prophecy actually say? And I want the details here, because the devil or the truth is in the details.
So in one of his quatrains, Century 1, Quatrain 35 to be exact, Nostradamus wrote about a specific conflict, and he used very distinct visceral imagery. He wrote, and I quote from the source, "The young lion will overcome the older one on the field of combat in a single battle."
Young lion, old lion. Okay. I mean, that feels a bit generic, doesn't it? That could be any war, any political rivalry. A son overthrowing a father. It sounds like something you'd read in a generic fantasy novel.
True. If the poem stopped there, we wouldn't be talking about it today. But then he gets remarkably specific about the mechanism of injury.
This is where it gets crazy.
He writes, "He will pierce his eyes through a golden cage, 2 wounds made 1, then he dies a cruel death."
Piercing the eyes through a golden cage. That is weirdly specific. It's not he will be struck down by a sword or he will fall from his horse in battle. It's eyes and golden cage.
And 2 wounds made 1. Keep that phrase in mind. It's clinically precise.
So fast forward, the prophecies out there, publish. What actually happened in real life?
The year is 1559. It's summer. France is celebrating a huge peace treaty with Spain. There are massive festivities happening, and the absolute highlight of the celebration is a jousting tournament.
The main event.
Exactly. King Henry II of France is feeling good. He's 40 years old. So in the context of the prophecy, he fits the older lion perfectly.
And a joust, just to paint the picture for you listening, this isn't a playful game. This is two guys wearing 100-pound suits of armor on massive war horses, charging at each other with heavy wooden lances at 20 miles per hour.
It is incredibly dangerous.
It's basically a car crash with a sharp stick involved.
It was the extreme sport of the day, and people died doing it all the time. And Henry decides to ride against Gabriel de Montgomery, who is the captain of his Scottish Guard.
And Montgomery is younger.
Montgomery is much younger, the young lion, if you will.
I think I see the pieces falling into place here.
They charge at each other.
Yeah.
And in a total freak accident, Montgomery's lance hits the king's helmet. But it doesn't just bounce off or break cleanly like it's supposed to. It shatters violently.
Oh, man.
A large, jagged splinter from the shattered lance flies upward with tremendous force.
And the king is wearing a helmet.
He was wearing a gilded helmet, a gold helmet with a visor that, with its bars, looks very much like a cage to protect the face.
The golden cage.
The splinter drives right through the visor, through the golden cage, and pierces the king's eye. It enters deep into his brain.
That is so gruesome.
It gets even more accurate to the text. The source notes that the lance actually caused two distinct injuries, one to the eye and one to the throat. But the resulting infection merged them into one massive, horrific trauma.
2 wounds made one.
Exactly. 2 wounds made one.
And the cruel death part, did he die right there on the dirt?
No. Henry didn't die on the field. He lingered for 10 days in absolute, unimaginable agony. He lost his mind from the swelling and the infection, suffering terrible seizures and paralysis before finally dying. It was, by all historical accounts, a profoundly cruel death.
Wow. So let's look at the scorecard here. You have the young lion beating the older lion. Check. You have the golden cage visor. Check. You have the pierced eye. Check. You have the 2 wounds merging. Check. And the agonizing, cruel death.
It is striking. The source explicitly calls the parallel striking. Even if you are a hardened skeptic, you have to admit that the description matches the historical event with an uncomfortable level of precision.
It really does.
It's not just a metaphor. It reads like a literal forensic description of the accident.
That's the one that always gets me. If he had just said the king will die, well, kings die all the time, assassinations happen, people get sick, they fall off horses. But the physics of the accident, the splinter through the cage, that's wild.
It is the prediction that really cemented his legacy for all time. Catherine de Medici, the queen we mentioned earlier, she saw this happen to her husband, and she firmly believed Nostradamus had seen it coming.
No wonder she kept him around.
That is exactly why she kept him close. She was terrified of what else he might see looming on the horizon for her family. But as we move forward in history through the source material, the predictions shift.
How so?
They go from specific individuals, like kings in a joust, to massive, sweeping social changes. Whole societies overturning.
Which brings us to the French Revolution.
A defining moment in human history. The moment where the old world fundamentally broke and the modern world really began. And according to the source, Nostradamus saw it coming 2 centuries early.
The imagery here is way less about jousting and more about just total social chaos. The source lists some key phrases from the quatrains, like enslaved people rising, princes imprisoned, and headless figures.
Let's think about that phrase, enslaved people rising, for a second. In the 1500s, the social order was incredibly rigid.
Feudalism.
Right. God put the king at the very top, the nobles below him, and the peasants at the very bottom. The idea of the common people, who were essentially serfs rising up and taking over, was completely contrary to the natural order. It was literally unthinkable.
It would be like predicting that the animals in the zoo will take over the city and start running the local government. It just didn't compute with their reality.
Exactly. It was absurd. Yet, Nostradamus confidently predicts a time when the populace demands rights and takes power. And the line, princes imprisoned, the royal family, King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, were literally locked up in the Temple Tower by the revolutionaries.
But the detail that really stands out to me, and frankly makes me a little nauseous again, is the mention of headless figures.
It is intensely vivid. Now, beheading existed in the 1500s.
Yeah.
But it was usually reserved for high nobility, and it was done with a sword or an axe by an executioner.
Right, it was rare.
It was singular. It was a massive public event. But fast forward to 1789, and what becomes the absolute industrial symbol of the revolution.
The guillotine.
The national razor, the guillotine mechanized death. It turned execution into an assembly line. The source discusses how this specific imagery strongly evokes the reign of terror.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Headless figures isn't just a metaphor for a country that lost its king. It describes a horrific reality where the streets of Paris were literally running with blood from thousands of daily public executions. Nostradamus seems to be describing the sheer, unprecedented scale of the violence.
He's seeing the whole system tearing itself apart piece by piece, and out of that chaos, out of the blood of the revolution, rose another figure that Nostradamus seemingly bookmarked perfectly, Napoleon Bonaparte.
This one is fascinating because it enters the realm of word puzzles. It feels almost like he's trying to sneak the name past the censors, or maybe he's seeing the name in a vision, but it's slightly distorted by the fog of time.
The source highlights a very specific text puzzle from the quatrains. It's the phrase, Pau ne Laurent.
Pau, ne, Laurent. On the surface, if you look at a map, those are 3 actual towns in southwestern France, so he could just be talking about geography. A skeptic would definitely say he's just listing towns in France.
But the source says if you rearrange the letters of those towns...
It's an anagram. If you take the letters of P-A-U-N-A-Y-L-O-R-R-N and you rearrange them, you get Napoleon Roy, which translates to King Napoleon.
Wait, really? P-A-U-N-A-Y-L-O-R-N, N-A-P-O-L-E-N. Okay, you have to squint a little bit, maybe swap a vowel or two, but the phonetic similarity is definitely there.
It is very close. It is commonly cited by believers as a direct, undeniable reference. But the source is careful to give us more than just a name game, because names can be coincidences. You can find Elvis in a bowl of alphabet soup if you stare at it long enough.
True.
But the geography backing it up is what makes it compelling.
Right, because Nostradamus wrote about an emperor who would be born near Italy.
And where was Napoleon born?
Corsica, which is an island right off the coast of Italy.
Exactly. And this is a crucial historical detail that the source points out. At the time Nostradamus was writing in the 16th century, Corsica was Genoese. It was politically Italian.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yes. It only became a French territory shortly before Napoleon was actually born. So describing this future French emperor as being born near Italy is a very specific geopolitical nuance that fits Napoleon perfectly.
And then there's the outcome of this emperor's reign. The prophecy says he would cost the empire dearly.
And that is a cold, hard historical fact. Napoleon was a military genius, yes. He conquered vast swaths of Europe. He completely redrew the map of the continent, but his endless ambition bled France dry.
The wars just never stopped.
The demographic damage to France, the sheer millions of young men who died freezing in Russia or charging at Waterloo, it crippled the nation for generations. He left the empire geographically smaller and economically weaker than when he found it, in many ways.
So Nostradamus nails the young Lion King jousting accident. He nails the French Revolution. He nails Napoleon. It's actually amazing to think of someone in the 1500s visualizing these things. But we have to go bigger, according to the source. We have to go to the 20th century, because the source suggests Nostradamus saw the world shrinking.
The 20th century marked a fundamental, terrifying shift in how humans fought and how they lived. The world became a shrinking world due to rapid technological advancement. And the quatrains seem to reflect this intense confusion and terror of new machines that he simply didn't have the vocabulary for.
One phrase from the source that really stuck out to me was battles in the sky.
Stop and really think about that context for a moment. In the 1550s, what was in the sky?
Birds, clouds.
Birds, angels, maybe a kite. The concept of actual human warfare happening thousands of feet above your head was physically impossible. It was the realm of gods, not men.
If you saw a biplane flying over Paris in 1555, you wouldn't say, look, a flying machine. You'd think it was a dragon or a literal demon from hell. You wouldn't have the words to describe an engine.
Exactly. So when he writes about battles in the sky or flying fire, he is struggling immensely to describe a mode of conflict aerial warfare that wouldn't exist for another 400 years.
It's incredible.
This ties directly to the terror of the Blitz in London or the massive dogfights of World War I. He's describing the impossible, which eventually became our routine reality.
And speaking of World War II, we have to talk about the ultimate villain of the century, Adolf Hitler.
This is another instance where the name games come heavily into play, very similar to the Napoleon anagram.
The source mentions the word Hister, H-I-S-T-E-R.
It's literally one letter off from Hitler.
Now, being the skeptic here, and I know we promised to keep our feet firmly on the ground, the source also carefully notes that Hister is just the old Latin name for the Danube River.
That's right.
So couldn't he just be saying something bad happens at the river?
That is the total rational geographical explanation. He mentions the Hister repeatedly in a geographic context in the poems. But look at the biography of Adolf Hitler. Where was he born?
Braunau am Inn in Austria,
which is a town located exactly where?
on the banks of the Inn River, which flows right into the Danube, the Hister.
Precisely. So you have a name, Hister, that is phonetically almost identical to Hitler, and it refers to the specific geographic region where the man originated. It's a double hit. Geography and phonetics lining up perfectly.
That is, is it coincidental? Maybe. But it's a heck of a coincidence. It feels almost like he's hearing the name echoing through time, but mistaking it for the location. Like he's hearing a static-filled radio report from the future, and the signal is fuzzy.
That's a great way to put it. And it's not just the name that fits. It's the very specific personality profile. The source mentions a quatrain describing a leader who seduces troops by speech.
Seduces troops by speech. That is the definitive description of Hitler's terrifying rise to power. He wasn't a brilliant general who took power by military force. He was a failed artist and a corporal who took absolute power by yelling from a podium.
He was the ultimate demagogue. He rallied millions of people through pure, hateful rhetoric. In the 1500s, power usually came from your bloodline or your gold. You were king because your dad was king.
You didn't talk your way onto the throne.
Right. The idea of a common, low-born man talking his way into absolute dictatorial power over a massive empire was a completely novel concept. Nostradamus seems to have nailed the exact method of his power, not just the location of his birth.
Now, if we're talking about terrifying, dangerous things in the 20th century, we have to talk about the bomb, the ultimate weapon, the thing that changed human history forever.
The source mentions a very chilling prophecy about 2 cities destroyed by unprecedented scourges.
Let's break that down. 2 cities.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The only 2 cities in human history to be destroyed by atomic weapons.
And the word unprecedented, that's the key word there, isn't it?
It absolutely is. War destroys cities all the time. Fire destroys cities. The Romans completely destroyed Carthage. The Mongols destroyed Baghdad.
Destruction is normal in history.
But an unprecedented scourge implies something the world has literally never seen before. A level of instant destruction that defies all previous categorization.
Nuclear fire. Something that burns hotter than the surface of the sun. Something that poisons the literal earth and the blood of the survivors for generations. That is unprecedented.
Exactly. The interpretation here connects that highly unique, specific phrasing to the atomic bomb. It's not just a big fire, it's a scourge unlike any other in human history.
And right around that same era, looking back just a little bit to World War I, the source mentions a prophecy about a great war, followed immediately by a greater pestilence.
The sequence of those events is what's important here. History is obviously full of wars and full of plagues, but the source links them explicitly. A great war, immediately followed by a pestilence that leaves cities deserted.
That sounds exactly like 1918.
The Spanish flu, it struck right on the heels of the First World War, and people often forget the flu killed vastly more people than the war itself did. It killed anywhere from 20 to 50 million people globally.
Leaving cities completely deserted. We all lived through 2020. We know what a deserted major city looks like now. But in 1918, with no modern medicine, no ventilators, it was truly apocalyptic.
It fixed the historical timeline perfectly. Massive global war, then unprecedented sickness. The order of events matches the history books exactly.
Let's move over to some American tragedies. Because apparently, Nostradamus didn't just focus his sights on Europe. The source brings up JFK.
The assassination of President John F. Kennedy, a defining, traumatic moment for the American psyche.
The imagery the source pulls from the text is a great man struck from on high.
From on high, which perfectly fits the narrative of the sniper, perched up in the technical book depository window, shooting down from the 6th floor.
And then there's the very controversial line about a dead innocent accused.
This ties directly into the endless controversy and the myriad theories surrounding Lee Harvey Oswald. Was he just a patsy? Was he truly innocent of being the sole mastermind?
We're not taking a stance on that, obviously.
No, absolutely not. We're just reporting what the source points out. But the prophecy seems to echo the deep conspiracy theories and the public doubt that have swirled around that event for decades. It perfectly captures the confusion and the enduring sense that the full story wasn't told.
And then we have the event that defined the 21st century so far, September 11th. This one really surprised me, especially with the geography.
Go on. Tell me about the geography.
The source quotes a line about fire in the great new city.
New city. York.
Yeah.
New York. It's right there in the name. Nostradamus often referred to cities by their Latin characteristics, but calling it the new city really stands out.
And it specifies a location. It says near 45 degrees latitude.
Now, I have to be the anchor here and bring us back to the map. We have to be precise. New York City is actually closer to the 41st parallel. It's about 40.7 degrees.
Okay, so he was a little off.
So near 45 degrees is off by about 300 miles. In modern terms, that's like confusing New York City with the middle of Maine.
True. But for a guy writing in France in the 1500s about a continent across the ocean that had barely been mapped by Europeans, yet 41 versus 45 feels pretty darn close. It's not like he had Google Maps on his phone.
That is a very fair point. It is remarkably close, given the era and the tools he had. And when you combine that latitude with the vivid imagery, fire in the great new city,
Yeah,
it's incredibly hard not to picture the Twin Towers burning against the skyline.
it really is. The combination of the new city label, the latitude being in the right ballpark, the imagery of massive fire creates a very, very strong association with September 11th.
And the overall sense of a massive, sudden, sky-based calamity.
It's honestly overwhelming when you stack them all up together like this. The Golden Cage, Napoleon, Hitler, the atom bomb, JFK, 9/11. You really start to feel like this guy really did have a cheat sheet for human history, like he had a sports almanac from the future.
And that is exactly the seductive feeling the source material is exploring. It makes you feel like the world has order, like it all makes sense.
Yeah.
But, and there is always a but, in this deep dive we have to put on our skeptic hats now. We promised to be grounded at the start.
Right. We promised to separate the fact from the fiction because, logically, if he's this incredibly good, why didn't we prevent any of these things? If we knew Hitler was coming, why didn't the world stop him?
That is the fundamental problem with these prophecies. The predictions are only clear after the fact. We only know Hister means Hitler after Hitler actually appears and starts a war.
Right. It's useless for actual prevention.
Exactly.
Right.
And it is also crucial to mention the misses, the predictions that were just flat out wrong. Because if you throw enough darts at a board while blindfolded, eventually you hit a bullseye.
The source mentions a very big miss, July 1999.
Yes. This was one of the very few times Nostradamus gave a highly specific date. He was usually very vague about timing, simply saying in the future or when the planets align. But here, he explicitly predicted a king of terror would arrive in July 1999.
I remember July 1999. I was listening to Smash Mouth and worrying about my computer crashing from Y2K, but the world did not end.
It did not.
No king of terror descended from the sky. There was no alien invasion, no apocalypse.
Exactly. Nothing globally catastrophic occurred on the scale of a king of terror. The world just kept turning. The date came and went without a hitch.
So what happened there? Did he just have an off day at the observatory? Or does this one massive failure unravel the whole theory?
This brings us to a very important concept discussed in the source, the retrofitting theory. This is the skeptic's absolute strongest weapon against Nostradamus.
Retrofitting. Explain that concept for us.
It's the idea that because the quatrains are so incredibly cryptic, so full of dense metaphors, weird anagrams, and vague imagery, they allow us to force-fit events into them after they happen.
Oh, I see.
It's essentially a historical Rorschach test. You look at the ink blot and you see exactly what you want to see.
Ah, so we're painting the target around the arrow after it's already hit the wall. We're finding the pattern because our brains are desperate to find a pattern.
Precisely. We look at a horrific tragedy like 9/11, and we frantically scan the book for words like fire and new city, and we say, aha. He knew. He saw it.
Right.
But if you sat down and read that exact same poem on September 10th, 2001, would you have predicted the attack? Probably not. You might have thought it meant a bad kitchen fire in Paris or a heat wave in Naples.
That makes total sense. It's hindsight bias on a global scale. We are doing all the heavy lifting, not him. We are the ones connecting the dots after the picture's already drawn.
And the source also points out the concept of cyclical history as a counterargument.
The idea that history just repeats itself over and over.
It does. The source notes that human history is entirely full of repeated wars, plagues, and crises. If you write 1,000 poems predicting war or terrible plague or political upheaval, eventually you are guaranteed to be right.
Because humans are completely predictable creatures.
Exactly. We fight over land, we get sick, we overthrow our leaders. It's what we do.
So Nostradamus wasn't necessarily seeing the future magically. He was just a very astute observer of human nature. He knew that eventually another ambitious young lion would violently challenge an old lion. It's inevitable. It's not magic prophecy. It's just statistical probability.
That is the most grounded interpretation. He was betting on the dark patterns of history continuing. And unfortunately, they have. He knew that peace never lasts forever.
That's a pretty sobering thought. It makes him less of a mystical wizard and more of a deeply cynical historian. But I don't want to end this deep dive on a total downer. The source actually mentions something quite optimistic hidden in all this.
It does. For all the doom and gloom, all the terrifying headless figures and burning cities, there is a consistent thread of hope in his work.
The Man of Light?
Yes. Nostradamus wrote that eventually, despite all the horror, the man of light will rise.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, it's open to interpretation, just like everything else he wrote. But the source suggests it's a profound belief that even in the absolute darkest times, and remember, this man lived through the horrors of the plague, he saw the very worst of humanity. There is always a hope for restoration.
That goodness eventually returns.
It suggests a fundamental balance to the universe. For every dictator, like a Hister, there is a man of light. For every devastating plague, there is a period of recovery and medical advancement. The pendulum of history always swings back toward the light.
I really like that. It's not just about predicting the end of the world, it's about acknowledging the incredible resilience of the world. So let's quickly recap this incredible journey we've been on. We started with a grieving, traumatized astrologer in the 1500s, a doctor trying to desperately make sense of a chaotic, cruel world after losing everything he loved.
We saw him seemingly predict the gruesome, highly specific death of his own king with the Golden Cage prophecy, a prediction so vivid it launched his entire career.
We watched the rise of Napoleon and the bloody fall of the French monarchy through his cryptic anagrams and chilling talk of headless figures.
We saw the absolute horrors of the 20th century Hitler, the atom bomb, the Spanish flu, all seemingly reflected in his centuries-old verses about battles in the sky and unprecedented scourges.
And we even touched on modern American tragedies like JFK and 9/11, seeing how specific coordinates and imagery can feel just eerily, uncomfortably accurate.
But crucially, we also recognize the mechanism of our own minds, the deep human desire to find patterns in the noise, the very real possibility that we are the ones writing the prophecy, simply by fitting our own modern history into his vague, poetic words.
So, after all that, why does this matter? Why are we still talking about a guy who died 500 years ago? Why do we care so much what a 16th century doctor thought about the future?
I think it highlights a truly universal human need. We desperately need to find order in chaos. The world is scary. The future is completely unknown.
Yeah.
The idea that someone, somewhere, saw it all coming implies that there is a grand plan, that there is a script to all this madness.
Even if the script is a terrible tragedy, it's somehow comforting to know there is a script at all. It means it's not just random, meaningless noise. It means we aren't just drifting alone in the void.
Exactly. It makes the random, senseless cruelty of history feel a little less random. It gives our suffering meaning.
Whether Nostradamus truly saw the future through the stars, or we are just desperately projecting our own painful past onto his words, the sheer fascination is real and it's powerful.
And it's not going away anytime soon. As long as the future remains uncertain, we will always look for people who claim they hold the answers.
I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. It's something that really struck me while I was reading through the source material preparing for this. If history is truly just a series of endless repetitions, if these ancient prophecies fit so many modern events simply because we keep making the exact same mistakes over and over, then the real question isn't whether Nostradamus was right.
The question is, are we doomed to repeat the past forever?
Exactly. Can we recognize the golden cage before we willingly put our own heads inside it?
That is the real challenge for humanity.
Something to think about the next time you look up at the stars. Thanks for listening to this deep dive.
Stay curious.
See you in the future.
Welcome to the debate. I want you to just close your eyes for a second and picture France in the year 1555. And, it is not the romanticized version we usually see in movies. It is a place of profound, almost suffocating darkness. The bubonic plague is just burning through the population. Religious civil wars are on the horizon, and the Inquisition is out there burning heretics at the stake for anything resembling sorcery. And in the middle of this nightmare sits a man, Michel de Nostredame. He's a physician who tragically couldn't save his own wife and children from the pestilence. He is traumatized, he is brilliant, And he is dangerous.
Yeah, dangerous is definitely the right word. Because when you start claiming to see the future in the 16th century, you are essentially flirting with the executioner. To survive that, you need powerful friends, which is why he aligned himself with Catherine de' Medici, the Queen of France. She was obsessed with the occult, and he very quickly became her favorite enigma.
Exactly. But he wasn't just a court jester or some crystal gazer. He was a man of science, or at least the science of his time. And that brings us to the central question we are tackling today. Does the historical record actually demonstrate that Nostradamus deciphered the architectural blueprint of history to forecast events like the death of Henry II, the rise of Hitler, and even the atomic bomb? Or, as you and many skeptics claim, are these writings just our Rorschach's test? Vague poetry that we just retrofit onto history to soothe our own anxiety.
Right. It is the ultimate showdown between pattern recognition and genuine foresight. Is he a visionary architect or just a vague poet whose quatrains are so intentionally obscure they could mean anything to anyone?
Well, I take the position that the specificity of certain details, names, locations, precise modes of death, and even anagrams, simply defies the laws of coincidence. When you really look at the hits in his material, specifically Les Prophecies, they suggest he cracked a code. He wasn't just guessing, he was using judicial astrology.
And I, naturally, come at it from a completely different angle. I argue that the prophecies rely almost entirely on ambiguity, linguistic gymnastics, and the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. We paint the bullseye around the arrow after it has already landed. And the fact that his most specific prediction, which was for 1999, was a complete failure, proves that we are the ones doing the heavy lifting, not him.
I appreciate that perspective, I do. But I think we need to clear something up immediately about the source material. When people hear astrology, they think of newspaper horoscopes. That is not what Nostradamus was doing. He was practicing judicial astrology. This was essentially the 16th century equivalent of big data. He was sitting in his attic in Salon de Provence with astrolabes and ephemerides, which are tables of planetary movements. And he was calculating the geometric relationships of Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars, projecting those cycles forward. He truly believed that history moves in predictable celestial cycles.
He was certainly doing math, I will give you that. But calculating where Mars will be in 10 years is astronomy. Claiming that Mars being in that specific position means a king will die is superstition. It's a category error. He was taking hard numerical data and applying soft poetic logic to it.
Was it soft logic, though? Let's actually test that. I want to look at the case of King Henry II. In my view, this is the strongest piece of evidence in the material that Nostradamus saw something real. This wasn't a vague, something bad will happen. This was quatrain 135.
Ah, the famous golden cage.
Precisely. Nostradamus published this 4 years before the event. He wrote, "The young lion will overcome the older one on the field of combat in a single battle. He will pierce his eyes through a golden cage. 2 wounds made 1, then he dies a cruel death."
It's highly poetic, certainly. But lion? Cage?
Look at the actual history, though. June 1559, King Henry II, who is the older lion, enters a joust against the Count of Montgomery, the younger lion. They were both reportedly using shields embossed with lion emblems. During the joust, Montgomery's lance shatters. A splinter flies up, and where does it go? It goes straight through the king's gilded visor, literally a golden cage protecting his face. It pierces his eye and enters the brain.
A tragic accident, absolutely.
But listen to the rest of the text. 2 wounds made 1. The splinter caused 2 distinct injuries in the skull and eye, merging into a massive infection, and dies a cruel death. The king didn't die instantly. He lingered in sheer agony for 10 days. Every single element matches here. The age difference, the single combat joust, the golden cage visor, the eye injury, and the lingering death. To call that a Rorschach test just feels like intellectual dishonesty. That is a direct hit.
Look, I will grant you, the imagery of the golden cage aligning with a gilded visor is his most striking success. It genuinely gives me pause. However, I am not convinced by that line of reasoning as proof of supernatural foresight. We have to look at the context of jousting in that era. It was the NFL of the Renaissance, but with lethal weapons. Injuries to the head and eyes were the most common fatal accidents. Predicting that a king who loves to joust might eventually be injured in the head is not exactly statistical wizardry.
But what about the young lion versus old lion?
That is exactly where the retrofitting comes in. Henry was 40, Montgomery was roughly 29. Is 40 old and 29 young? Maybe in the 16th century, but they were contemporaries. And the lion emblems, that is a heavily debated historical detail. Some records show lion imagery, others don't. We emphasize the lions now because it fits the poem beautifully. If the king had died hunting a boar, supporters would say, the boar is the beast of the forest. The lion metaphor applies to his sheer courage. The metaphor is an elastic band. It stretches to fit whatever the event is.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a slightly different perspective on his methods. If Nostradamus had written, Henry II will die by a splinter to the eye in 1559, he would have been burned at the stake for treason or witchcraft. He had to cloak it in metaphor to survive the Inquisition. The obscurity wasn't a bug, it was a vital feature of his survival. He called it the green language. It was writing that could be understood by the initiated, but claimed as complete nonsense to the authorities.
Or as he just wrote nonsense so that he could never be proven wrong. I mean, if I say a great leader will fall, I am going to be right eventually.
But he didn't just say a leader. He named names. Or at least, he came terrifyingly close with his anagrams. We have to talk about the KPAU-NALORN line.
I was waiting for this one. You are referring to quatrain 8-1.
I am. Nostradamus writes about a ruler and uses the capitalized string pe, ne, loron. He warns of more fire than blood. Now, if you rearrange those letters, you get Napoleon Roy, Napoleon the King.
Hold on, you are doing a lot of heavy lifting there. Pau, Ne, and Loron are just 3 towns in the southwest of France. Pau, Ne, and Oloron-Sainte-Marie. Nostradamus lived near these places. He was likely referring to a geographic region, maybe a local conflict or a border dispute. You are taking a local geography lesson, scrambling the letters like a game of Scrabble, and claiming it is a proper name.
But look at the context surrounding the anagram in the source material. It notes that Nostradamus described this figure as an emperor born near Italy who'd cost the empire dearly. Napoleon was born in Corsica, which is near Italy but was French territory. And did he cost the empire dearly? He completely drained France of a generation of men. You have an anagram name, a specific geographic origin, and a remarkably accurate description of his destructive impact. That is a trifecta of data points that you simply cannot dismiss as a list of local towns.
I can, actually, because born near Italy fits thousands of historical figures. Every Duke of Savoy, every Genoese merchant, every Southern French noble fits that exact description. And regarding the anagram itself, if he meant Napoleon, why didn't he just write Napoleon? Why list 3 random towns? It is because if nothing happened with a guy named Napoleon, he could point to the towns and say, well, I meant a plague in Oloron. It is a hedge.
A hedge that accidentally spelled the name of the greatest emperor in French history?
It is the law of large numbers. If you write 942 quatrains with thousands of proper nouns and Latin phrases, eventually you will find a combination that looks like a name. Which brings us to the other name people constantly obsess over, Hitler. The material mentions Hister.
Yes, Hister. Just 1 letter off from Hitler. And the text describes a leader who seduces troops by speech and crosses the Rhine.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that connection. Let me tell you why. Ister is the ancient Latin name for the Danny River, the Ister. Nostradamus wrote in a mix of French, Provençal, and Latin. When he writes about Ister, he is geographically placing an event near the Danube. The fact that Ister sounds like Hitler is a linguistic coincidence that English speakers really latch onto. If Hitler's name had been Schicklgruber, which was his father's original surname, nobody would be making this connection.
That is a fair point on the etymology of the river. I will concede that Hister means Danube in Latin. However, consider the action associated with the word. The source material explicitly links this to a leader who seduces the multitude with his tongue. We are talking about the 20th century's most infamous demagogue. Hitler's rise was predicated almost entirely on his oratory skills. Nostradamus also describes battles in the sky and iron cages in the same breath as these conflicts.
Battles in the sky is an interesting phrase, but again, historical context matters deeply here.
It is more than interesting. It is wildly anachronistic. For a man in the 1500s to conceptualize aerial warfare, literal battles taking place in the heavens, suggests he was seeing something that simply didn't exist in his reality. He describes the world becoming smaller, which fits perfectly with the globalized nature of the world wars.
Well, and hear me out on this. He was just extremely well-read in classical mythology. Ancient texts are full of battles in the sky. Gods fighting, Valkyries, massive storms described as celestial armies. If you live in a time of deep superstition, a severe thunderstorm looks exactly like a battle in the sky. We read battles in the sky today and we think Spitfires and Messerschmitts, because that is our modern context. He likely just meant divine conflict.
Divine conflict doesn't really explain the specificity of the weaponry, though. And this is where the two cities quatrain comes into play. This is, in my opinion, the most chilling description of the atomic age in his entire body of work.
You mean the Hiroshima and Nagasaki interpretation?
Yes.
Quatrain 2:6. Near the gates and within two cities, there will be scourges the like of which was never seen. He then explicitly mentions famine within plague and people put out by steel, scourges the like of which was never seen.
Exactly. Not just a siege, not just a standard war, an unprecedented scourge, something entirely new. We have exactly two cities utterly destroyed by a weapon the world had never seen, ending the war. That feels incredibly, terrifyingly specific.
It does feel specific until you look at the fundamental logic of 16th century warfare. Two cities is a very common literary trope. Think Sodom and Gomorrah, Rome and Carthage. And the scourge, he mentions famine and plague in the exact same line.
Famine within plague? Radiation sickness?
That is a massive leap of logic. In the 16th century, literally every single siege resulted in famine and plague. Armies surround a city, the food runs out, which is famine, and then sanitation collapses, which causes plague. Predicting that a great war will involve cities being destroyed by famine and plague is like predicting that winter will be cold. It is an astute observation of a cycle, not a psychic vision. You are reading plague and thinking radiation because you already know what happened in 1945.
I think this missing unprecedented scourge is just standard siege warfare as being a bit uncharitable to the text. He didn't say the usual misery. He said never seen. But let's move to a more structural argument. The revolutions.
Right. The French Revolution is his home turf, I suppose.
It is. He writes about enslaved people rising, princes imprisoned, and, most chillingly, headless figures. The great part of the battlefield will be against the king,
which the source material strongly links to the guillotine.
Exactly. He describes the complete inversion of the social order. Princes in prison matches the fate of Louis XVI and his family in the temple perfectly. The headless figures are a direct evocation of the Reign of Terror. If you are a royalist living in the 1500s, predicting that the common people will rise up and legally execute the aristocracy is a bold, highly specific claim. That just wasn't the norm.
I would frame it differently. Social upheaval is a constant in human history. The Wheel of Fortune concept, kings falling, beggars rising, was an absolute medieval staple. If you write enough vague verses about doom, gloom, and headless princes, eventually a revolution will occur that fits the bill perfectly. The French Revolution was uniquely significant, yes, but was it the only time princes were imprisoned? Was it the only time people were beheaded? England beheaded Charles I a full century earlier.
Perhaps. But the density of the imagery, princes, enslaved rising, headless bodies, it all clusters around 1789 perfectly. But if we really want to talk about clustering and precision, we have to talk about the new city. This is the one that keeps me up at night regarding 9/11.
Ah, the fire in the new city quatrain. quatrain 1072 or thereabouts.
Quatrain 697, actually. At 45 degrees, the sky will burn. Fire to approach the great new city. He mentions a huge scattered flame that leaps up.
Okay, let me stop you right there. 45 degrees,
Yes.
the latitude.
New York City is located at 40 degrees 42 minutes north. Nostradamus explicitly said 45 degrees. Do you know where 45 degrees north is? It is in Canada. It's the border of Vermont. It is nearly 350 miles away from Manhattan. If I told you to meet me at a restaurant and I missed the location by 350 miles, you wouldn't call me mathematically precise. You would call me lost. But in the context of 16th century cartography, that is a remarkably minor deviation. Maps weren't perfect back then. And look at the name, City of York, becomes New City, Villeneuve. It was a term he used frequently. He is describing a new city in the northern hemisphere, around the 40s latitude, being attacked by fire from the sky.
But Villeneuve, or New City, was an incredibly common name. There is a Villeneuve in France. There is Naples, which literally translates to Neapolis, New City. He could have easily been talking about a fire in Naples. The only reason we link it to New York is because of the sheer scale of the event. If a meteor had hit Toronto, which is actually closer to 45 degrees, by the way, we would absolutely claim he predicted that instead.
But the scattered flame? The fire from the sky?
Again, meteors, storms, or simply warfare. It is vague enough to fit, but precise enough to be completely wrong on the actual geography.
I'm not totally convinced by that line of reasoning, because it ignores the accumulation of detail. It is not just one isolated line, it's the layering of facts. But I know where you are going next. You are going to bring up the one thing that literalists cannot talk their way out of.
I absolutely am. Because for all this talk of unprecedented scourges and history, Nostradamus gave us one very specific, crystal clear date. He didn't use a metaphor. He used the calendar.
July 1999?
Quatrain 1072. The year 1999, 7 months. From the sky will come a great king of terror. He said this would resurrect the great king of Angoumois.
And, well, nothing happened. The world didn't end.
Exactly. We were there. I remember it vividly. There was no invasion from the sky, no king of terror. The sun rose, the sun set. This proves that when he actually pinned himself down to a hard date, when he stopped hiding behind golden cages and young lions, he was dead wrong. If he was a visionary architect, why did the clearest blueprint in his entire collection fail so spectacularly?
I admit, that is the primary stumbling block. 1999 is the hardest nut to crack. But I wouldn't say absolutely nothing happened.
Oh, come on.
Hear me out. He predicts the arrival of a king of terror, not necessarily the immediate end of the world on that specific day. Look at what happened in August 1999, literally just days after the 7th month. Vladimir Putin was appointed Prime Minister of Russia, a man who would go on to reshape the geopolitical order through fear and conflict. Or consider the seeds of 9/11. The operational planning for the terror attacks was solidifying right there in 1999.
That sounds exactly like moving the goalposts. You were saying he predicted a king of terror in July, but a guy got a political promotion in August, so it totally counts. That is the dictionary definition of confirmation bias. If nothing had happened with Putin, you would point to the Kosovo War. If not that, you would point to a massive solar flare.
But isn't it entirely possible he was seeing the turning point rather than the explosion? The king of Angoumois is often interpreted as the Mongols, an Eastern influence. The rise of Eastern powers challenging the West really began in earnest around the turn of the millennium. Maybe the terror wasn't a bomb, but a profound shift in the global psyche.
Or maybe, just maybe, he was an old man in a tower looking at a world completely full of plague and war, projecting his own personal fears into a specific date that felt far enough away to be safe. And he just missed.
But even if he was just projecting fears, how do you explain the sheer resilience of his work? Why are we still fiercely debating this 500 years later if it is all just complete nonsense? Why does it still resonate so deeply?
Because we love a mystery. And because, as the source material actually suggests, he profoundly understood the architectural patterns of history.
That is a really beautiful way to put it.
He knew that wars happen, He knew that leaders seduce with fiery speech. He knew that empires fall and cities inevitably burn. He didn't need to see 1945 specifically to know that eventually a city would be destroyed by a terrifying scourge. His success comes from our deep human desire to find order in chaos. We desperately want to believe someone is driving the bus, even if the driver died 500 years ago.
That is a compelling argument, though I would frame it just a bit differently. I think he tapped into the rhythm of history. Whether he saw the literal face of Napoleon or just the shape of a Napoleon-like figure, he identified the recurrence of these grand archetypes. The young lion replaces the old. The man of light rises after the darkness. He essentially saw the wave function of time.
That I can definitely agree with. He was a master observer of the human condition and the absolute inevitability of tragedy.
So, where does that leave us?
I think it leaves us with a brilliant writer who created a profound mirror for future generations. A mirror that simply reflects whatever we happen to stand in front of it.
And it leaves me with the conviction that while not every single line is a perfect GPS coordinate, the density of the hits, from Henry II's eye to the fire in the new city, suggests he saw further than most. He might have been viewing history through a glass darkly, but he was certainly looking.
And perhaps that is the real magic. Not that he flawlessly predicted the future, but that he wrote a text that can adapt to literally any future we create.
A cycle of crisis, war, and eventual renewal. As he wrote, the man of light will rise. Whether that is prophecy or just profound hope, it is a message we probably still need today.
Indeed. Just don't make any financial bets based on the next quatrain.
I will keep that in mind. Thank you for joining us for this exploration of the cryptic and the concrete.
It was a true pleasure to decode it with you.
And thank you all for listening to the debate. Until next time.